Okay, so we're beginning Pirke Avot, which is on page 235. And who
Do
would
we
like
have the
to-
blessings before we read?
Well,
Study?
in view of the late hour, maybe we can dispense with the blessings.
Oh,
No.
Right.
no, Anne says no.
No,
So,
okay.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asek b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay, would someone like to read the paragraph that we read before each study session of Pirke Avot?
Let's see.
35.
All Israel shall have a portion in the world that is coming, as it is written, your people shall all be righteous. Thank you. They shall possess the land forever. They are a shoot of my planting, the work of my hands, in whom I shall be glorified.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, so now we delve into Pirke Avot, which is on page 243. So
Of
we'll
Lev
begin-
Shalem.
Pardon?
Of Lev Shalem, for people who
Right,
are,
thank you. In the left
Yeah.
Shalom is page 243. And I have to say that in preface that when I first started preparing, I was going, oh my goodness, I don't know where this is going. And I have to share my indebtedness to Rabbi Ari Solish, who is the Chabad rabbi in Atlanta, Georgia, or probably one of many Chabad rabbis in Atlanta, Georgia, if Newton is anything to go by. And because he gave a shiur, he has a shiur on each parak. And it was just fabulous, and it really helped focus me. So I have to give him credit for it, even though he doesn't know it yet. So I'm going to write him a thank you email later. All right, so who would like to read the first Mishnah?
but let's move on. Okay, Anne, can you read it?
Sure. Akiva ben Machalel taught, ponder three things and you will avoid falling into sin. Know your origin, your destination, and before whom you will be required to give an accounting. Your origin, a putrid drop. Your destination, a place of dust, worms, and maggots. Before whom you will be required to give an accounting, before the ruler of rulers, the holy, exalted one. Okay, so the first thing I noticed when I read this is that if you go back to the beginning of Pirke Bet, you have Yehuda Hanasi. This is on page 238 in the Lev Shalom. Nope, yes. And where he also says that there are three things. If you look toward the bottom in 2:1, ponder three things and you will avoid committing a transgression. Keeping in mind what is above you, an eye that sees, an ear that hears, and the book in which all your deeds are recorded. And so it's like, what's going on here? We have two. What do you see that is similar or different, or both, between these two passages? I was really hoping Stephen Epstein would be here so I could put him on the spot a little bit. Any takers?
well, it's challenging, Anne, because it's on its face, this concept of a deity in the clouds. It doesn't need to be that, but on its face, that's what it seems to be. An actual,
In two,
yeah,
yeah, yep. And in three?
3 seems slightly more less formed in a good way.
Okay,
One's own definition, I guess, is
all right,
kind of what I'll say.
okay. Anyone else? I do believe in audience participation.
Yeah.
What was the one in Pirke 2? What page was that? I'm going back and forth is difficult.
238.
Okay,
It's, in 2:1, there are sort of like 3 mini paragraphs. It's the third one.
Well, the other thing I'll say is that in this third, it's also in a sense more interactive. You are an entity and you are going to give an accounting. Whereas in chapter 2, it's more about being watched and recorded. So there's a little difference there in terms of approach and self-participation in the process.
All right.
I think it also, in Gimel, it places a greater premium on being modest. On, not just on doing the right thing, but also not remembering that your life is limited, that you came from the dust, you'll be dust again. And so this is your lifespan is your opportunity to do right, and it's what you can be judged on.
Okay. Anyone else? One way to look at it perhaps is that in Yehuda Nasi is looking in a more lofty way, looking at all of the potential of man, whereas in 3:1, it's more like, who do you think you are? You come from a putrid drop, you go into a place of worms and maggots. You are no better than anyone else. And so in that sense, it's it's sort of, as you said, David, it's calling you to be mindful of where you fit in the world, that you're not, even if you hold some kind of a high rank, you're really no better than anyone else. I think that, the phrase, when people are asked to do public speaking and they're very nervous, and everybody says, well, remember, they all put their pants on the same way, one leg at a time. It's the Talmudic version of that. But
yeah,
now here, but there's an interesting thing. The last part, the form who will be required to give an accounting. Now, if you look in the Hebrew, it actually says something slightly different. Din v'cheshbon.
That's an accountant.
Yeah, but what's din?
the court, the judge.
Judgment, so.
Judgment.
So an audited account.
Well, din, but it's not din cheshbon, but din v'cheshbon, a judgment and an accounting.
Right, although, at least in modern Hebrew, it's usually shortened to just doch.
Right, but they weren't writing in modern Hebrew.
But my point is that those two words going together was an idiom.
Or term of art.
Yeah,
Okay. But it can all, but if you look at it as two possible concepts, where can you go? And so one of the things I learned in this shir is that according to the Baal Shem Tov, it's when a soul goes to heaven, let me restart. The soul, there is nothing more powerful than the soul, because the soul is part of Hashem. And so the judgment is, the soul in essence has to give its own judgment, but you can't, but according to Baal Shem Tov, what happens is that when you get to heaven, the angels sit you down and say, you know, before anything else happens, we have, there's this other guy, this other soul. We don't know what to do with, because, you know, we're angels, we've never lived on earth, we don't know what's going on. And so this is the situation, what is the judgment that you would give? And so the soul that has now arrived to heaven has to pass a judgment on another soul. But it turns out that what's really happening is that they then take that judgment and say, and use the cheshbon to say how it apply, how that judgment applies to the soul that gave it. So that when you're judging someone else, it's really a judgment on yourself.
Huh.
Once you get up and,
That's very interesting.
and so, you know, what do we take away from this? You know, because of course the idea is that if you ask a soul to judge itself, what's it going to do?
Right.
I'm great, I'm wonderful.
Well, unless, or unless at that moment, because of where you are, you might be more inclined to
Be truthful.
be honest, yeah.
Well, I agree, you might be more inclined to be truthful once you're right there. But anyhow, suppose this is supposedly the reason that the angels do this to try to hoodwink you into really being honest. If you have to judge somebody else. So how does that relate to our everyday life? And yes, audience participation is always welcome.
What intrigues me here is that they talk about Olam Haba, because you're going to be around to give an accounting after your death.
Mhm.
And yet it still takes the trouble to say your body is going to rot. Usually that's in the context of, well, your body may rot, but your soul will live on, and that's even a positive thing. And here it's like, you know, it's reminding you that your body is only of limited tenure, limited importance. So you have to think path beyond the needs of your body.
That's really important because that keeps coming, that's actually a theme that keeps coming up in Pirke Gimel.
Oh,
And we'll get to it, but that's really cool, and remind me if I don't say it. Okay,
Okay.
because as I say, I alternate between being very comfortable with what I know and then being terrified that I don't remember anything. So, yeah.
you're on mute.
I'm mute.
That's what I was doing. Wanted to get waited until Ann called on me before unmuting. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
Shabbat
shalom.
shalom.
So good to be studying with everybody this morning. And for those of you who know me, I am a real Pirke Avot junkie. I think this stuff is so wonderful in its timelessness. And what in looking at this first Mishnah, it just to my mind speaks very authoritatively in a contemporary voice, and by that I mean mindfulness. You know, it's so easy to get distracted by the pressing emergency that's in front of me, to go into autopilot, to not be present to what I'm doing, to not be mindful of my intentions about what I'm doing. And this says, stop. Be aware of what you're doing. That's what I'm taking from it. Make certain that you're aligning your energies so you don't get to the end of this day this day being one of the days that we count. So am I making this day count? To be present to the people who are in my life. And then when you were talking about the judgment, the other contemporary thing that came to my mind is, I'm sure everybody knows the old thing, when you're pointing the finger at somebody, right? We have one finger going out, but what do we have? A minimum of 3 fingers pointing back, because if I can spot it, chances are it's because I got it. So when I'm deriding someone else's shortcoming, what am I doing? I'm projecting onto them the stuff that I grapple with myself. So I think this is just a very timely and urgent calling to be here now. Be mindful of what you're doing.
You are, again, the point you're raising is also repeats over and over again in this paragraph. And the takeaway, one of the takeaways that one could have from this last sentence, this last meditation, shall we say, is that we need to think we need to think kindly about people. You know, sort of the grain of salt. We need to look at just try to see everyone in the best light. You know, so that if we have to judge someone, we do it with compassion and you know, and we now and do the best that we can. Now, if you go back to the first part of this, the first part of the Mishnah, it says, "Hisakel b'shloshah dvarim ve'en ata ba lidei avera." You're not going to fall into the hands of evil. So it's the translation is to avoid falling into sin, but in Hebrew it's actually lidei avera.
Huh.
Mhm.
And so, what do you make of that? And you should see me do Shakespeare.
Well, that would suggest that evil exists as an entity, and that your job has to do with focus of self, because if you make yourself available to this other entity with hands, this evil, that you may fall into it. And the antidote for that is what follows on, which is to maintain humility. And as you were saying, to stay, in your own moment, not be distracted by things.
Right, you have to be vigilant.
And yeah, this idea of hands makes evil more active than that you yourself are doing bad things. This is that there is evil in the world and it can grab you.
Right,
So,
or the access point of evil.
yeah.
Exactly. And so what is the access point of evil? In people?
The amygdala.
Okay, okay, and for those of us who have not been to medical school lately.
I've never been. Yeah, it's the part of your brain, metaphorically and literally, that is interested first and foremost in meeting your most basic needs and meeting them in any way that's available.
Okay, and what personality trait, how about that? Let me narrow this a little bit. What personality trait in people would take you to the access point of evil and crossover?
Well, selfishness, just caring only about oneself.
Okay.
Survival and pleasure.
I'm sorry, Cliff?
Survival and pleasure.
Survival and pleasure. Okay,
Yeah.
personality traits begins with an A.
Arrogance.
Very good. That would be the one. Arrogance. that if you remember that you come from a putrid drop and you're, and you're headed for the worms, and the worms don't really care if you were a king, a queen, a beggar, what have you, they're gonna eat you regardless. And I don't think you're gonna taste very different one way or the other. It keeps you humble. And so it takes you away from opening the door, so like opening the door to evil. Like a handle.
May I share a teaching?
Sure, please.
And this is from Joe Rosenstein's book, which a dear friend gave me a copy of. And in the commentary on this Mishnah, he gives the story of the 17th century Polish rabbi Simcha Bunim of Peshisha, who taught that a person should carry in his pockets 2 pieces of paper. In one pocket, the paper should read, "For me, the world was created." And in the other pocket, the paper should read, "I am but dust and ashes." What are we talking about here? Hubris, humility? When the person feels low and dejected, he or she takes out the paper in the first pocket and reflects on his high status in God's creation. But on the other hand, when the person feels high and mighty, he or she takes out the paper in the second pocket and reflects on his low status in God's creation. If you follow the advice of Rabbi Simcha Bunim, you will strike the appropriate balance in your life, grasping at the same time your importance in the world and your unimportance in the world, the value which you have been endowed and the ephemeral nature of that value.
Although
Awesome.
keep careful track of those pieces of paper though.
Absolutely.
I tried this and, I was feeling very low and I reached into my pocket and it said Holly Cleaners. That didn't help me at all.
Oy.
Okay,
We know who the prize.
I'm sorry.
no,
Yeah,
I'm
I
sorry.
missed what you talked about, but I see it as when you get up in the morning, you need to have purpose, some goal or something you know you're going to do, otherwise you can just get lost in doing the things that can put you in trouble. So I see.
Well, what's great about the 2 pieces of paper is that there are times when you are being too humble, when you're being humble, so humble that you're hurting yourself and that you need to be pulled out of that. So you have to avoid both extremes.
Right. And I think that's a big part of Pirke Avot in general is about balance.
And then,
So, let's see, it's 1:15. We've only been on this one for half an hour. We are going to get through all of Parak Gimel. We may be here till 7. Joe.
Okay.
yeah, I'm
Okay.
sorry you can't see the big smile.
No, really, I'm grinning from ear to ear or something like
Yes,
that.
I think what I'll do is I'll bring in paper, I'll bring in a paper mask that says smile, frown, smile, frown.
Okay, so moving on to Pasuk Bet. So would you like to read it, Yael?
Please wait.
Sure.
So, okay. רבי חנניה, סגן הכהנים אומר, הווי מתפלל בשלומה של מלכות, שאלמלא מוראה, איש את רעהו חיים בלעו.
This is a really cool Mishnah. Dave, would you like to read the English?
Sure.
Thank you.
Rabbi Hanania, the deputy high priest, taught, "Pray for the welfare of the government, for if people did not fear it, they would swallow each other alive."
I mean, seriously, go out in the street and you see people just gulping down whole other people.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a real happening. So,
It happens, yeah, it happens even with the government. It would just be that much worse.
right,
without
oh, no, this has to do with praying for the government. So, but, let's start by looking at who exactly is this, Rabbi Hanania. Now, in English, it says the deputy high priest, but in Hebrew, it says Sgan HaKohanim in the plural, the deputy of the high priests.
Oh,
Is there a distinction?
And so, so Hananiah, Sgan HaKohanim, lived toward the end of the Hasmonean period.
Mhm.
And it was a time when the government wasn't exactly as kosher as we would have liked. And it was somewhat corrupt. And the high priesthood was being auctioned off. So you have, and so people would, bid on it, and whoever had the highest bid would become the Kohen Gadol. And Kam Yom Kippur would go into the Kodesh Kodeshim and die. Because he wasn't a tzaddik, he wasn't, the right person for the job.
Mhm.
But there were people who really wanted to do it just so they could see the Aron, and so they would do this even though they knew they weren't going to come out of it very well. And so it's very interesting that here he is, he's the Sagan HaKohanim, because there was a lot of overturn in the Kohanim while he was there. And
So he wasn't, he never would
Gadol.
step up to be the Kohen Gadol.
right, it's not
He
even
was
clear-
always the
the
second.
deputy,
Yeah.
right, he was probably a lady, but it's not clear that he was a Kohen
Mhm.
himself. So he actually witnessed a pretty corrupt government. So here's this guy who witnesses a pretty corrupt government, and he says, pray for the welfare of the government. And so you need to have a government, even if it is corrupt, because you need some kind of laws where people will swallow each other whole.
I have a question though.
ah,
Was Hananiah was in fact from the time of the Hashmonaim and not from the Roman period?
I believe he's from the Hashmonaim.
Because, okay, I wasn't aware that any of what we have.
I'm
in
not
our-
sure, honestly, I'm not sure. But so as I say, I remember I was saying about comfort and terror here.
Yeah,
This is on the terror side.
and I always thought, and I could be totally wrong, that anything that we have here is from the temple period, second temple
right,
period.
hang on,
forward.
Roberta,
Yes,
please turn to the back of the book you have in front of you and look
that's what I
up,
was thinking of. Yes.
because she has a chart
Oh,
that gives the
This-
history of each of the, and
I
then,
mean, this was while the second temple was still, Hananiah is from when the second temple was still active.
right.
okay.
I have a commentary that I'm looking at, Abraham Twersky's
Yeah.
comment, and he says Rabbi Hananiah knew better. As a deputy to the high priest, he was aware of the depravity that prevailed during the latter days of the Second Temple, a time during which Torah observance was often stripped of its beautiful spirituality, and so forth. So I thought that it was during the Second Temple, but I realized that could have been after as well, and he was just aware of it.
Well, he could be Second Temple, but not pre-Hasmonean. I mean,
I didn't
there's,
say pre, I said at the end.
at the end, I'm
I said
sorry.
at the end of the Hashmonaim.
I'm sorry, I
That's
wasn't
okay.
listening, I wasn't listening carefully. and I
No, it's
apologize.
okay, it's
Well,
okay.
So we have one question, which is, was he being an apologist for a corrupt regime or not? But
No.
leaving that question aside, the compiler of Pirke Avot thought that this was an idea worth preserving, worth passing on. So I guess it could stand for the proposition that a government, even an imperfect government, is still a necessity.
Right, is better than no government,
Right.
absolutely. And part of it is that this sort of idea that you don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Just because just because part of it is broken doesn't mean necessarily that the whole of it is broken. I mean, this is something that we are contending with our own government.
Mhm.
How much of it is broken and how much of it is salvageable?
I was also thinking of this idea in the context of the failure of the Bar Kokhba revolt. That over the government, an oppressive government, it may not be the best idea to plan to get rid of the government, even an oppressive one, unless you stand ready to replace it.
Oh, interesting. I never thought about it.
It's like having an
That way.
exit strategy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's not enough to, if you're going to overthrow a government, you have to have something to put in its place. You can't have a vacuum.
right, and you have to have the wherewithal to actually overthrow it. Or you'll just destroy yourself.
And then-
This is, I have a different sort of comment on, when it says, if people do not fear government, a person would swallow his fellow alive. And I just wonder to what extent that doesn't have applicability, that if you don't fear God, that you can swallow yourself alive and not have,
There is also that interpretation that the government isn't the one on here, but
Mhm,
government of Hashem.
mhm.
And that if you don't have the proper respect, that you will swallow yourself and others alive. And that's actually really interesting language. What's this swallowing people alive? I mean, it's,
Well, and you have the Aaron's sons end up bringing the wrong fire and they are swallowed. They are
yes, but
burnt
they're
up.
swallowed by Hashem, not by another
Yes,
person.
yes.
And this is talking about people swallowing people. So what does that mean for a person to swallow another person whole?
Well,
May
and
I? According to Chabad, Hanina ben Teradion, a 2nd century in the Common Era Mishnaic sage, was the father of Beruria, Rabbi Meir's wife. He directed a Torah academy and was renowned for his scrupulously honest administration of charity funds. Bad news, guys. He was one of the 10 martyrs
That's
wrapped
a
in.
different
That's a
rabbi, that's a
different,
different
yeah.
rabbi.
Yeah.
We'll get
Rabbi-
to it in a minute.
No.
Yes,
yes.
Oh, it's the other one for 3-3. I'm sorry. You're right.
Oh, yes,
we're gonna get to him. We're
that's-
gonna get to
Okay.
him.
that's Hanina with an olive.
All right.
Hanania with an olive at the end.
Okay,
Yeah.
Mm.
Cliff, you were saying?
Well, again, you can swallow yourself if you're not being yourself, or if you're only looking out for your selfishness and arrogance. That is a manner, you aren't honoring God, you aren't fearing God, and therefore you aren't serving God. So you're only, and I guess it's in a way, not sure where this goes, but when we were talking about the amygdala, and that's more the animality, of man. If we're honoring just the animal, or are we honoring the heavenly, the soul, which is in heaven?
This is
And-
so cool because, again, this is another theme that comes back
Okay.
within Gimel. It's, and we probably, I don't know if we'll get to it, but I think that's really cool. I mean, it also, if we think of interpersonal relationships, what does it mean to swallow another person?
Well, it can mean to negate their self, to not see them, and to be so strong in yourself that you swallow up anything of them.
Exactly.
you marginalize other people.
Well, right, and when you think of how many people treat service employees, they don't actually see the person. It's where's my meal? What did you do with my bag? It's the person doesn't actually exist as a person. It's just how the person exists only to serve you. Then that's another way of swallowing someone whole.
Yeah, I read this and I have to leap into modern times for just a moment because I can't not.
Right,
I think that what happened from 2016 is that the government gave license for our fringes to become more present. Is that fair without being too political? I think it's exactly this. I think we had groups of people who had feared a government and got a new government that they not only didn't fear, but that they felt saw them
they felt
Which-
empowered by it.
And gave them license.
and
yeah.
gave them license. And that a little bit of it is the times generally, a little bit of it is a lot of different things. But I think a big, huge chunk of it is that it is the nature of human nature to realize that if societal norms, which include government, will not approve of your worst self, that it keeps it tamped down, it keeps it on the fringes. So I think it would be lovely if every individual could take personal responsibility to be a good human being. But it is not human nature. And I think this is, exactly what happened. Anyway, here's my 2 cents for it.
Thank you.
Yes. Excellent.
Well.
No, I mean, no,
It's like, yeah.
No, but this is the value of Pirke Avot. It's talking to us today in a meaningful way that, it helps us live our lives.
Right.
So,
It's also it's a rebuke to those who think that there is that even before the Mashiach comes, there will somehow be a magical kingdom on earth where we'll have perfect freedom and everybody will behave well, and that we can somehow achieve that without having rules, without having the force of law. It's not going to happen.
right,
It's dangerous to think that it could.
right. Exactly. So now we get into Rabbi Hanania ben Teradion, who is one of the 10 martyrs, and he is the martyr who was wrapped in a Sefer Torah and doused with some kind of an accelerant that the Romans put wool over his heart so he would suffer more. And
Damp wool.
as it was burning, he said he saw the parchment of the Torah falling, but the letters flying up to heaven. And so, he definitely defied the law of not teaching Torah. So the language here becomes very curious. Would someone like to read this Mishnah?
Well, save time. Why don't you just read it?
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Rabbi Hanania ben Teradion taught, when two people meet and do not exchange words of Torah, they are regarded as a company of scoffers, as it is written, who joins not in the company of scoffers. However, when two persons meet and exchange words of Torah, the Shekhinah hovers between them, as it is written. Then those who fear Adonai conversed with one another. Adonai listened and heard, and a book of records was made before God of those who fear Adonai and cherish God's name. This verse implies two persons. where do we learn that even one person sitting alone studying Torah is rewarded by the exalted Holy One? From the verse, a person shall sit alone and meditate quietly, yet take a reward for it. Source for that is Echad.
Right.
Well, first of all, I think we should once again be careful of the translation of fear of Adonai, because it's really that word that doesn't translate well.
You're right, it's respect.
It's awe and, you know,
Right, it's, when Christians say God fearing, they don't mean
Yeah.
fear, they mean
Actually,
understanding and appreciation and
Right.
willingness to, accept.
right. It always gets translated as fear. It makes me really crazy.
Mhm.
It always makes me crazy when they do that, but that's beside the point. Okay, but there's okay, so why would two people gather and not speak of Torah? And think back to that time, not necessarily to now.
Because it was forbidden?
Okay, it was forbidden, that would be one. But let's say it wasn't forbidden and they didn't speak of Torah. Why might one person not speak of Torah to someone else?
Well, they were distracted with more worldly things.
They
couldn't
were
get-
idol worshipers.
Well, yes.
Well,
they-
that's certainly
Well, yes, that would be at one extreme,
Yeah,
but they could also be
merchants.
idol, IDLE.
Yes.
Worshipers who are easily distracted.
Nice, David. That was
right,
very
that was
nice.
I like
very-
that.
That was
like that
excellent,
one.
David.
But is it possible that one person might think the other person was not worthy of discussing Torah with?
Or that one thought that you were not worthy to discuss it with the other person who was a chacham.
Right. I mean, so there, again, this idea of modesty and arrogance and, hey, I'm so great is part of what comes into it. I haven't found, and I hope someone else may have, any commentary to talk about what I was originally thinking when I read this, which is, hey, people get together to chit chat and catch up on life. Why would they talk about Torah right then? I mean, I haven't seen you in, let's say I'm visiting with my cousin. I haven't seen you in 2 years. Are we going to talk Torah or are we going to catch up on life? Which one? And so I didn't find any commentary that spoke to that. And so I think we have to look at it in terms of,
Something
barring
else.
that, looking at it in terms of that people normally do speak words of Torah, so why might they not?
Right, it is creating a norm of talking Torah, which I suspect at the time and all time since then is not really the norm. But it's sort of
Unless
stated
you
that
live in a Chabad community.
even then they have to discuss the laundry,
Right,
Uh,
but not at a meal.
And I have a commentary that addresses this.
Thank you.
Oh, great.
So let me just read you this short paragraph from Tversky's book. He says, of course, that people have discussions of business or something pertaining to community affairs. In our morning prayers, we recite a bracha that we have been divinely commanded to be engaged in the words of Torah. Note the term is to be engaged rather than to study. It's only natural that people must have other essential activities, which include work and commerce. However, everything we do must be goal-directed, and our ultimate goal is to abide by the Torah. In order to do so, we must eat, sleep, and earn a livelihood, because unless we have the essentials of life, we cannot fulfill the mitzvot. Even rest and entertainment, when done in a measure that promotes optimum health and functioning, can be considered in the service of Torah observance. It is only when one's actions are aimless without a goal that one may be considered to be a scorner. The Hebrew word lights, meaning a scorner or scoffer, refers to a person who does not see life as a serious mission and who dismisses the concept of an ultimate goal. And so I actually, in some of my other meditative groups and so forth, there's this sense of having God always with you. And I feel like that with Torah too, that it's a part of you. And so I don't think, it just doesn't say you have to be studying Torah, but that your life is a reflection of Torah. So that's how this makes sense to me, having the broader overriding goal to have God, be God infused in your life, or Torah. And when you're having your business discussion, Torah is in your mind. So you want to be honest, you want to act with integrity and so forth. So I think his section speaks to what you asked, I hope.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's really helpful.
That's really good.
What book are you reading?
I'm reading, this one is called Visions of the Vision. Oh, wait, let me take off that ridiculous blurring background. Okay, Visions of the Fathers by a commentary by Abraham Twersky, who
Thank you.
sadly just died last year. His stuff's really great and accessible.
Yes.
Mhm.
He was a psychiatrist.
One thing that I was, when it talked about those who Hashem listened and heard, and a book of remembrance was written before him. And I was listening to somebody, I don't know Hebrew, but they were talking about knowing the Moadim in your life, I guess the sacred moments in your life. And most of my sacred moments come around, marriage or children or things like that. But there are times, many times in Torah study that all of a sudden was sort of like David's comment on idol worship and idol worship. That was just a spark of the divine. And I don't know whether I'll remember that as a sacred moment, but it'll be a better moment, and looking for that. And if you're just gossiping, those are not opportunities for that. So anyway.
And in fact, just at the beginning, we were talking about bird watching. It's one thing to watch and say, oh, this incredible bird, but to have it infused with the recognition that this is like some sort of miracle or amazing things happening. Yeah, bringing really that to me is tied with your was talking about with mindfulness and being in the present, is having this with you, the sense of awe that's talked about often, having it with you all the time. And when you're with somebody else, not letting it devolve into stuff that lets that go.
That's great.
I think that's awesome. There's an interesting point again in translation that about Shnehem she'yeshvim v'yesh beinehem divrei Torah. So between them, there are words of Torah. Shechina Shurya Benehem, that Hashem will be there. And so this might be a reflection of the times, that they were able to, it could be interpreted perhaps as that they are both exuding, consciousness of Torah in how they deal with each other. But if you think of the time that Hananiah was living in, that they were able to somehow get Torah into their conversation, sort of sneak it in under the radar so that the censors or whoever didn't catch them, because it was, death if you studied Torah. So even if you were able to somehow get at it indirectly in your conversation, so that between you there were these words,
Yeah.
that even then Hashem will be there. And you will share in the world's come.
What's immediately leaping to my mind is if you have ever been around, especially devout evangelical Christians, no matter what you are talking about or any problem solving of any sort, God always enters the conversation.
True.
Yes, which must be
And-
lovely for them. It's infuriating to witness.
Yeah, I'm just saying, that's sort of,
And that's probably the way they would feel if they were.
Yeah,
Good or
and
bad.
also some, also some, very observant Jews, often talk about mundane things in the context of, which, as a reminder, Esther, as you were talking about, as a reminder of context.
Right, I mean,
Ask an observant Jew how they are, and they'll say, go with Hashem.
Right,
right, exactly, it occurs all the time,
right.
it occurs all the time.
Very
And,
sorry,
as we've been talking about ego and suppressing the ego and whatever, I don't know if anyone has ever heard that ego is really an acronym for edging God out.
Mhm.
Oh,
Oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting. I've not heard that.
I thought it was a breakfast waffle.
I'm sorry?
Nothing. Let's move on.
Okay, so
You're
moving
really
on
on
to
today.
3:3 in, what, 2 minutes? Okay, so here we have Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who was the author of the Zohar, who was one of the 10 martyrs, who fled with his son for 13 years in a cave. And he says, 3 who dine at a table and do not exchange words of Torah are considered as having eaten of idolatrous sacrifices. As it is written, for all the tables are filled with the vomit and filth when Hashem is absent. Okay, so let's put this into context. He was studying for 13 years with how many other people?
Just his son.
Just his son. So the idea of a third person must have been incredibly exciting. Wow, 3 people. But if they don't speak Torah, what is it that they are doing? And it's as though they are eating an offering for the dead. There are no words of Torah. There's no godliness in it. And there is no elevating themselves, the food. There's nothing that promotes godliness. However, 3 who dine at a table and exchange words of Torah are considered as having eaten at God's table, as it is written, and God spoke to me, this is the table before Hashem. So how does the table get elevated?
This strikes me as a more melodramatic expression of the sense. It's earlier.
What if you think of one of the ways we refer to Hashem is Hamakom? And what does that suggest?
That if God isn't present, you're nowhere.
What, I'm sorry?
That if God isn't present, you are nowhere.
Right, but it also suggests that he's in everything, even perhaps even in the table. I mean, it's not to say that the table is Hashem, but rather that everything has a divine spark, and so you need to bring that out. Thoughts?
Well, and in my Tversky commentary, he says exactly that. In every physical object, there is a spark, a nucleus of Kedusha, which Wes talked about in his sermon today, not about food, but having Kedusha or holiness in our lives. This nucleus of divinity that is within the food is the nutrition of the neshama. And he says, if one eats without reciting the appropriate blessings or sharing words of Torah, the body absorbs the minerals, etc. But the nucleus of godliness that is in the food was not extracted. So it's similar to the one before, retrieving the sparks of godliness that are dispersed within the physical world and doing that with a meal. And if you ever take a mindfulness course, it's very different to sit down and eat with your newspaper or whatever and pay no attention to your food than it is to sit down do a blessing or some gratitude, thankfulness before you eat. Think about the miracle that some farmer wherever is doing this, and we get the food with all that it entails to get to us.
Yeah.
And it really, I mean, I don't do it often, but when I do, it really transforms the meal. It does elevate it.
Yeah.
So that's what I think he's getting at here. And I find it
Yes.
helpful to review this.
Well, and again, you know, everything that everyone has said keeps coming back. So everyone has said something prescient to what is coming in this para. How late do we go until?
Before now.
Well, we're technically, we're done, but we can go for a little longer.
It's up to you.
Do you
It's
have-
completely, I did the whole para.
Okay, you're permanently assigned this parrot.
I'm permanently assigned this para. Okay, so next year we're beginning at dollar.
Right.
We could continue for, if you want to continue for another, yeah.
Well,
Do you
yeah, I
have-
mean, it's just, to me, it became, the first part, I would say that a good first half of this parak is about focus, limiting the ego, making sure that you are surrounded by people. And I mean, it's just, I have to admit, I came into it and I was reading and going like, how are these connected? I mean, seriously. And by the end of it, I was going like, this is so cool. So,
Would it be reasonable to ask you to share any other like overarching themes that since you?
I'm not that good.
Well, no, but
Well, I mean,
earlier, you know,
but-
David said something and you said, well, that's sort of in here too. And-
Right, well, the thing is that as you go through it, you have, you know, for example, the pagination got messed up, so,
That's okay, just the.
no, okay, so 3.9, which is on page 245.
Or whatever text you're using. if
Yes,
it's
but
still
it's-
labeled 9,
It's, well, it turns out not every text
right?
is labeled the same way.
Right.
But anyhow, so
Distinguish
this is,
the fake time and-
this is Rabbi Yaakov. And, you know, one engaged in study while strolling, who interrupted to remark what a beautiful tree or what a lovely field is considered as having committed a capital offense.
Oh, yeah, I remember.
Yes,
so-
yes, which
And
is,
that really, when I first read that, I was going like, what? How, I mean, aren't we supposed to praise Hashem for the beauty
Right,
of the
right,
world?
right, that seems contrary to what we were saying earlier.
But it's about focus. It's about, if you are studying, while you're studying, you don't interrupt it, go, oh, wow, that's a really pretty tree, or that's a, you know, nice field, or whatever.
Mhm.
The idea is that you stay focused. This is my no multitasking puzzle, you know, puzzle here. It's like, you focus on one thing at a time. It's not that it's not saying don't appreciate nature, it's saying. if
Don't
you're stu-
interrupt.
Don't interrupt. If you're studying, you're studying. If you're in nature, you're in nature. If you're cooking, you're cooking. If you're mowing the lawn, you're mowing the lawn. You know, it's like, you can't mix it all up.
Right, we have to accept the fact that the sages express themselves in a hyperbolic fashion. So that looking at a tree, you know, could be a capital sin, when what they're really trying to say is, you know, don't be distracted.
If I may jump in here for just one quick second, this business of being distracted, even by the grandeur of a tree, to bring it into contemporary, I always like to make the link between then and now. In the commentary that I'm using this morning, it underscores the fact that when you are journeying back in those days, to be on any kind of a journey was to expose oneself to danger. And so being mindful of where you are and what's going on around you, very important. And in more contemporary terms, as a recovering texter while driving, then there's the things that
Yeah.
saying, it's okay, it's just going to be a short text. It's just going to be a couple of seconds where my focus is not going to be entirely on what I'm doing. And that just, spills over. And to just conclude, when one of my very favorite authors, I shouldn't say that because I've got so many, but Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, in his book Jewish Meditation, says anything that you do can become infused with holiness through the concentration that you bring to it, the intention that you bring to it, so that a mundane task like doing the dishes you can elevate it by infusing it with, why are you doing the dishes? Because it's a loving thing to do for yourself, for your family. And Esther, you were talking.
It's a way of keeping peace in the household.
Shalom
Okay.
bayis.
There's nothing higher than Shalom Bayit. I'll leave it with that.
I feel like we need to do Pirke Avot like we do the Haftorah. I mean, the Torah reading and triennial cycle, only maybe in here we need, they're 25. We need to do it across 6 years. We can do 4 a year.
Not a bad
Or
idea.
1 a year.
May I add something to it? Because just reading Perek Gimel, not Perek Gimel, but Mishnah Gimel, we're talking about Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai and the disciple of Rabbi Akiva and everything that he talks about. This week is Lag BaOmer, which has the connection with him. Now, people have been studying for 1,000 years. They've been studying Pirke Avot the week before Lag BaOmer. They've been studying this Mishnah, which I think is so sweet and so dear to remember. That's all.
Absolutely.
Nice, very good.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom.
That's
Thank
shalom.
you.
Shabbat
Shabbat
shalom,
shalom,
everyone.
Lekulam.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you
Thank
for
you, thank you.
preparing.